I was concerned when I arrived in Quito. My flight from Colombia was delayed 2 hours, which meant I'd arrive at my accommodation after midnight. This was my first time in Ecuador, and I didn't know what to expect. Apparently, the country has gotten more dangerous from the rise of drug trafficking over the past few years. I booked a room in the residential neighborhood of La Floresta. The building was owned by a sweet elderly couple who lived on the second floor and rented out the third floor. The apartment was gorgeous, airy, spacious, full of natural light, comfortably furnished, and with a large terrace overlooking the city. The 2 bedrooms were rented out separately, and so far I was the only guest. The kitchen had every size of pots and pans you could imagine, but it lacked staples like oil and salt. I asked the cleaning lady if she could give me some salt from the other apartment, and she kindly brought me a saucer full, which would be more than enough for my week in Quito. I wished the shower pressure was stronger and the hot water lasted longer, especially since Quito was on the chilly side. Luckily, my mattress was firm, the bedding was warm, and the pillow was comfortable. Long-term travel is a challenge in adapting the intimate aspects of domestic life, as well as the changing languages, cuisines, and religions with each border crossing. I went to a local supermarket and was pleased to find a wide selection of fruits and vegetables. I bought strawberries, bananas, broccoli, zucchini, tomatoes, brown rice, garlic, and oil. Ecuador uses the dollar, and there were no prices marked on any of the produce. I was expecting a large bill at the cashier, but it was less than $10. It started raining while I was shopping, but I didn't mind. The rain cleaned my dusty sneakers on the walk back. It usually rained every afternoon during my week in Quito. A blanket of fog rolled in every night, making the apartment even cozier. I'd usually make the most of my mornings with a long walk through the adjacent neighborhoods. One day I walked to the convent in Guapulo, a charming cobblestone neighborhood nestled on a hillside. The downhill walk was easy, so I could appreciate the architecture and scenery, but the walk back uphill left me soaked in sweat and gasping for breath. Quito's elevation is over 9,000 feet high, almost 3,000 meters, and the altitude affected my endurance. Ecuador means equator, so the sun is much stronger than it feels, even on cloudy days. On another day, I walked through the neighborhood of La Carolina. I passed office buildings, high-rise apartments, shops, restaurants, an expansive park, all the components of a capital city. I took a car back to my apartment because it was starting to rain again. I didn't expect to see anything out of the ordinary. Normal people went about their weekday lives as they do in any other metropolitan area around the world. I took walks through La Mariscal during the day. My hosts told me to avoid that neighborhood after 6 p.m. when it gets dark. The streets were eerily deserted, and many businesses had their doors locked during opening hours, which I found odd. You had to knock first. Someone would unlock the door to let you in, and lock it again once you were inside. I learned later this was to do with the rise of drug-related crime in Ecuador. There was a fear of being vaccinated among local business owners. What happens is a local gang member will pay a visit to your shop or restaurant to demand a monthly bribe. This guarantees both the owner and the business from receiving harm by those same gang members. This happens in Colombia, Mexico, and any place in the world with gang presence. I hurried back to my residential neighborhood where I felt much safer. 2 new things I tried in Quito were Andean blueberry ice cream, or mortiño, and my first ever pole dancing class. I was searching for salsa and bachata, but found a pole dancing studio around the corner from my apartment and decided, why not? The studio was owned by a handsome gay couple. The 2 men were impressively flexible and could both do a full split. There was no dancing involved, more like a series of climb, hold, pose. It was a humbling experience. I was visibly the thinnest and most fit, but I did not have the upper body strength. My small hands and weak wrists struggled to grip the pole. Simple moves the other women executed with ease felt impossible for me. By the end of the class, my muscles were sore, my hands were shaky, and my ego had taken a healthy hit. I follow a cost-effective and healthy eating strategy while I travel. I have a simple breakfast of oatmeal and fruit at home, go out for the daily lunch special and try the local food, and cook a wholesome dinner with a lot of vegetables. I usually go to the same local restaurant every day and have something different on the menu. There was always a French woman having lunch at the same time I was. It took about 3 days for me to strike up a conversation with her. Her favorite thing on the menu was the catfish soup, so I decided to have the same. She told me she lived in Cornwall, England, and was in Ecuador doing her postdoc. She was heading to the Amazons in a few days. It seemed like we were living inverse decades. She spent her 20s traveling the world as an anthropologist, while I had 2 careers that anchored me in New York City, then Ho Chi Minh City. Now in her 30s, she was tired of moving around the world, while I feel like I'm just getting started. I planned to visit the National Museum, but I decided to stay home to read and write. I've had a difficult time concentrating lately. After picking up and putting down 8 different novels from Dostoevsky to Virginia Woolf, I decided to give poetry a try. It worked. I read Love is a Dog from Hell by Charles Bukowski. He paints a cynical portrait of love, seeing it as a messy, destructive force that brings pain and heartbreak. He explores themes of loneliness, sex, and the complexities of human relationships. I didn't feel the need to go downtown, where most tourists usually stayed. There was a brand new Gothic cathedral in the historic center, but I just wasn't interested. I loved my calm neighborhood with its fashionable coffee shops, and I was enjoying my spacious apartment with its beautiful terrace. My most joyful hours in the past few days was cooking a nourishing meal in my kitchen while a thunderstorm raged outside, then wrapping myself in a blanket and watching a nature documentary series in my living room. I'm leaving for the Galapagos soon, where there will be 12 days of nonstop movement and adventure, which gives these moments of tranquil stability higher value. One thing I needed before the Galapagos was a haircut. I cut my hair once every 2 years. I let it grow down to my waist, then cut it to just above my chin. It was only about halfway down my back at the moment, but I felt it was time. I chose a tiny barber shop across the street from my daily lunch restaurant. It was owned by an elderly married couple. The husband cut men's hair and the wife cut women's hair. They had probably been doing this for over 30 years. Neither spoke English, but I showed the woman a photo of what I wanted. She nodded and showed me to my seat. I was alarmed when she began asking me questions in Spanish while she was cutting. I decided to say yes to everything and hope for the best. The haircut was $5, and I went home feeling lighter, freer, and maybe just a little wistful of my long flowing hair that was a part of me only moments ago. Though I'm still quite young, I've noticed a lot more white hair in the past year. Out of vanity, I used to pull them out as soon as I noticed them, but I have too many now and just leave them be. One day, I'll cut off more white hair than black. I wonder who I'll be when that time comes. The TV was on during my haircut, and the news announced national power rationing would begin the next day. Ecuador is mostly powered by hydroelectricity, and rivers were dry due to the drought. The government implemented power rationing in the major cities, with each neighborhood taking shifts for different parts of the day. Some businesses had their own generators, but for the most part, the lights were out and certain things on restaurant menus like cappuccinos could not be served. There were no power cuts at night for security reasons. My freelance work has been lighter recently, so I wasn't too concerned with having no internet for 4 hours a day. Still, it was troubling. There was someone in the apartment when I returned from the hair salon. A man with thinning brown hair and a large stomach. He had a scowl on his face, and he carried his backpack into his room. How odd it was in a traveler's backpack. It was the kind students used for high school. The man didn't speak Spanish, so he must have been a foreigner. I was confused by his lack of luggage. At first I thought he was in Quito for work, but if so, then he'd likely stay in a hotel and carry something more formal, perhaps a small suitcase. It turned out he was a minimalist, long-term traveler who just returned from a 12-day retreat in the Amazon. Not ayahuasca, but yopo, which I never heard of before. He wasn't bothered by the 4-hour power cuts each day because he wasn't working while traveling. My new roommate's name was Noam, born in Jerusalem in a Hasidic community. He moved to Brooklyn, New York as a teenager. He managed to avoid active duty in the Israeli military for religious reasons, and eventually left the Hasidic community because he wanted to know the outside world and experience life without such a strict and isolating constraints. I couldn't help but ask how he paid for his long-term travel. He told me he was an investor in a solar panel company. We went to a coffee shop nearby and ordered cappuccinos before the power went out. I asked Noam about his retreat in the Amazon and had the feeling he either didn't want to talk about it or didn't know how to explain it. I'd ask him questions and there'd be a long pause before he answered. He seemed to be knowledgeable on the psychedelic plant medicines of Latin America. When I said I used to live in Mexico City, his instant response was that Mexico had peyote. My mind would have gone straight to tacos, enchiladas, and aguachile. I was intrigued when he took a small flask of whiskey out of his jacket pocket and added a shot to his coffee. He said alcohol helps the mind come back to the body after an extended psychedelic journey. I would have assumed the opposite, but I'll have to take his word for it because I don't drink alcohol. Noam had a lot of trauma. He said this retreat equaled 10 years of therapy. It shouldn't be in a big group, and it doesn't have to cost thousands of dollars. In fact, he said it cost him only $30 if you knew the right people. A friend of mine works in ayahuasca retreats and referred to it as big business in Peru and growing rapidly through the rest of Latin America. I wondered how many shamans the Amazon could possibly supply to satisfy the growing demand. Our coffee each came with a piece of dark chocolate, which I love. I ate mine with relish and was surprised when Noam gave me his piece. I thanked him and asked, "Didn't he like chocolate?" He replied, "If it's that easy to make a girl happy, a man should do it." I found this incredibly sweet. I told him I just got a haircut and didn't like it much. He replied, "Yes, it looked as if I just made a change, but not to worry. My hair will adjust to me instead of me to it." Later on, Noam heated up some leftover steak and mashed potatoes. He realized he accidentally used my oil and apologized profusely. I told him it was no problem at all. He could use as much as he wanted. I wasn't taking a bottle of oil with me to the Galapagos. I wondered what his past trauma could have been. He was having trouble explaining this recent psychedelic experience. Or perhaps my questions were annoying. It became increasingly difficult to hold a conversation with him. He was reserved most of the time, looking slightly uncomfortable with my presence, but then spontaneously show flashes of warmth. I decided to leave him to his inner reflections and watch more nature documentaries. Traveling throws you into a kaleidoscope of personalities. Not everyone you meet will be your next best friend, and that's okay. Just be polite, respectful, and let them continue on their journey in peace. You never know who you'll meet next while traveling long-term. Find out how I settle into daily life in a small town in Colombia's coffee region in this video, where I get lost in the mountains while hiking alone and do a bit of medical tourism.